It's about a month ago now, actually. I did mention to you that I was going to have a look at a new series, going to go into something following meals with Jesus and that kind of thing. Do you remember that? It was back in May, I think it was. And so I'm going to kind of pick that up this morning. And you'll hear a few different voices along the way in this series. We've got a couple of people dipping into this. So next week, I think we've got Mike Fagredo. The week after that, we've got the illustrious David Morris. I have to say that because he's sat over there. You see, you've got to flatter him and make sure he turns up. So thank you, David, for doing that one. And we're just looking at some of these meals that Jesus had with people. When things happened, he mixed with anybody and everybody, really. Way back in May, when I mentioned this to you, I asked the question, who do you eat with? Who do you share table with? Who do you share food with? Beyond your immediate family and at your home or your close friends who drop by, who do we share our table with or invite into our homes or even our gardens, say for a barbecue? Who do we have a cup of coffee and a piece of cake with? Who do we meet up with at Costa to share life with? And we can flip that round and we can ask ourselves, whose invitations do you accept and whose invitations do you turn down? It's another way of thinking about the people that we give time to. Slow down with. Last time round in May, when I kind of threw this idea out to you, we had a look at the account of Matthew, the tax collector, being called to follow Jesus, and we saw grace at work in the act of an invitation. Just inviting somebody to be with you for them can be a wow. They want me to spend time with them, to spend time at the meal table with them. This business of hospitality, sharing our table, sharing our time, sharing our home, sharing our life with people. It's a big deal. It speaks of things like acceptance. Life slows down at the meal table. Even for the fast chewers, life slows down at the meal table. We had 3 boys and they could eat quickly. There's a case of survival of the fittest, I think, in our house, and the lads ate quickly. But life slows down, especially at communal meal times as well, when there can be a bit of time with things being got ready and put on the tables and that kind of thing. What do you do in between courses? You talk to people and get to know them. We listen, we talk, we are part of something when we're together around the table. We're kind of included. There's a sense of acceptance. There's an equalizing of things. And Jesus didn't just share good news. He shared life as he shared good news. And a big part of life is eating together. For most of us, 3 times a day, 3 meals a day, whatever. And I think it's time for us to honestly think about that and look at who we intentionally share that time with. And just have a think about it. People from within the church, people from outside the church. Who do we choose to give that time to? It's time for us to recover some of these things, especially after a couple of years of lockdown when we've become so isolated and we've lost those connections. And to compensate for that, I think we need to be very intentional with this and make an effort about this. Hence trying to get these groups together in church this week in the hall and so on. And then hopefully we'll move on back to some home groups. We'll see how we do. Last time round, I mentioned that Son of Man was a title that Jesus used to describe who he was. It's kind of a reference back to Daniel 7. He used it a lot, used it 78 times. It was Jesus' favorite way of describing himself. How did the Son of Man, how did Jesus come? He came eating and drinking, says Luke 7. Yeah. Yes, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. He came to give his life as a ransom for many. That's in Mark 10. Yes, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost in Luke 19. They're statements of purpose answering the question, why did Jesus come? Why did he come? But the Son of Man came eating and drinking is a statement of method answering, how did Jesus come? So says Tim Chester in some of his writing. Jesus came as one of us, as one of us, the Son of God, eating and drinking with people like you and me. Fantastic. And he modeled something in the way he lived to us. If all of that is new to you, then that recording, if you can put up with it, is all on YouTube, and you can revisit it. It's Sunday the 8th of May, and that was the introduction. But we're going to have our reading for today now, which is going to come to us on Zoom. Brian is out there in Zoom world. If you've got your Bibles with you, please open them up, switch them on at Luke chapter 7, verses 36 to 50. And Brian, if you're there, please unmute yourself. And when you're ready, bring us this reading.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone. And I hope you can hear me. So Luke 7, starting at verse 36. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that time who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner." Jesus answered him, "Simon, I have something to tell you." "Tell me, teacher," he said. Two people owed money to a certain money lender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven." "You have judged correctly," Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace."
Thank you, Brian. That was great. What a passage! It's a powerful passage, isn't it? This one, and it's one that merits a lot of looking at, actually. And we've only got a bit of limited time this morning, but we're kind of looking at this example of a meal in the shadow of this meal that we're going to share together shortly. And that's quite poignant, I think, actually. I think most of us can picture the scene. Table is set for a meal, the guests have arrived, they've taken their seats around the table, chit-chat is underway and all the rest of it. Some people there know each other, others don't. Introductions are being made, this is so-and-so, oh, what do you do, where do you live, all this kind of thing. The food arrives, maybe the first course is served, we begin to eat and we begin to relax. The format has been with us for centuries, hasn't it, really? Eating together. Whether it's an African village to a European castle to downtown Chesterfield and Derbyshire, the format's been with us forever, really. The meal and community and eating together as a group. We are social creatures, actually. We're made that way. We're wired that way. It's not... In this episode that Luke describes, historians tell us that the diners are probably reclining around three sides of a central table. So you've got to imagine the table is probably a bit of a huge shape, or if it's one big square table, there's only people sat on three sides of it, and so they're round. And it's empty on one side, so the servants can put the food on and take it off and so on. And in those days, the style was you reclined at the table. I don't know quite how they did it, actually, because I think my arm would have gone a bit dead, but they kind of reclined at the table with their head and arms in the direction of the table, the feet out behind, which kind of explains why this woman, when she came into the room, she arrived at Jesus' feet first, not his head. His head was towards the table. And that's the way they did things. And it was set up in such a way that it wasn't just about the food, it was about the chat. And the usual form was there'd be a bit of a discussion afterwards. You might have not so much a guest speaker there, but you might have invited somebody round who the rest of the group might have wanted to hear a little bit from, somebody they were privileged to be with, they're not usually in town, whatever. And on this occasion, I think Jesus is probably that person. So they're reclining, they've got their feet off the floor, and it's fairly relaxed, fairly convivial, and so on. The house is probably a big one for somebody who's able to afford to do this kind of thing. So it's a larger house rather than a smaller one. And out there, past the end of the table, there's probably a bit of a courtyard out there, and the door is open. And the door is pretty much always open because there are people coming and going in that courtyard. There'll be deliveries, there'll be people popping in. The hustle and bustle of life goes on. You've got to remember that these people did not have freezers and fridges and that kind of stuff. So a lot of stuff just got delivered on the day and that kind of thing. There might have been somebody in town that day who got a bit of business to do with the guy who owns the house. And it just happened that way. And the door is open. And there might even be some people out there listening a little bit to what's going on the inside. You know how it is. People are nosy, aren't they? Don't you think? We are all curious, aren't they? A farmer told me there's only one thing more nosy than a farmer, and that's two farmers, okay? So, this is how we are. We're curious. We want to know what's going on. So the door's open, the table's set. The courtyard is a semi-public area. People can hear what's going on. And as in this case, wander in. And it kind of explains how this woman gained entry. But she doesn't just wander in. This unnamed woman who clearly has a reputation that precedes her, she comes into the room. She's actually intentionally gate-crashed. How would you cope with that at your meal? If somebody turned up, the doorbell goes, and the choice is you can turn them away. Is that rude? Or do you let them in and just take part? She's gate-crashed. So we're in Galilee. There is a solitary woman who's entered the house of a Pharisee, a pious religious man who considers her to be of dubious moral standing. So he doesn't think much of her, and you can read into that what you want. And she comes in on her own, a room full of men who immediately watch her and look at her, and she's come to anoint the feet of Jesus, one man. And there's a collective gasp round the room as the diners kind of take a sharp intake of breath, hold it. Because the question they've got is, what will he do? How will he respond to this? The holy traveling rabbi, and she's washing his feet. It's awkward, isn't it? It's awkward. It's very inconvenient, not least for the host. Is she an unwanted visitor, or is she a welcome guest? What do you think? Take a vote on that, couldn't we? And how would it be if it was in our house and we were the host? What would we do? Luke is, it seems that he delights in picking stories that involve people like tax collectors, like prostitutes, as if he loves pressing the spot, provoking us, and asking us this question, really, the subliminal question that's in all of this as we watch how Jesus interacts with different people. He's asking us, have you got it yet? Have you grasped the principle yet of God's grace and how he deals with people? Tim Chester, again, he asks this. He says, how do we react when a promiscuous woman kisses the body of Jesus? How do we feel about that? Do we celebrate it as God's grace, or are we scandalized by it? You see, the grace of God turns out to be a bit uncomfortable and a bit embarrassing. Don't you think? Can be, can't it? And it's exactly how we feel when the wrong people kind of arrive in our lives. And you would have all had some of these experiences, sometimes when you've been walking around town maybe and somebody just asks you for help. And you take one look at that person and all sorts of things pop into your head, all sorts of words, and you interpret that situation. And we're embarrassed about what we're thinking, and we're uncomfortable about what's been asked of us. Happened to me right in the centre of Edinburgh once, in a park that was absolutely packed with people. And I was approached by somebody, and it was very uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. And I think what I want to say to you this morning is that Jesus is disruptive. He is disruptive. If you read the Bible carefully, it's disruptive. To let him into our lives is to allow him to disrupt us, to change us, to press the spot that makes us feel uncomfortable, that makes us feel a bit embarrassed, to make us wince kind of at ourselves and our own behavior, and be convicted to change. And that's the tough bit. Maybe change how we behave towards people. Maybe change how we behave towards the environment. We looked at that not that long ago. Transform us, think differently, see things, see people the way Jesus does. And just to make it clear, Jesus disrupts his church. He does. He disrupts his church. You look throughout history and the church has been disrupted at regular intervals, had to change its view on certain things and recognize that some of the things it's been doing were maybe not that good. Because I guess what's coming out of this passage now, one of the things that's in there is that some people in our world are marginalized. They just are. They're marginalized. But they're not a problem to be handled. They're not projects to be dealt with. They're human beings, people with names to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged, to be accepted, to be understood, to be loved. Grace. Jesus is the friend of sinners. Question: is his church too? Is his church also friend of sinners? Back to this woman. She comes in. She welcomes Jesus. She welcomes Jesus. What's her story, I wonder? What did it cost her emotionally, for a start? What did it cost her emotionally to come through that door and walk through that room full of those people, to endure the glares, the mutterings, the almost, what's she doing here, get her out threat of violence that was in the atmosphere, maybe unspoken, but it was there. What did it cost her financially for the perfume, for the jar that she broke and the perfume she poured on him? She is the one that is giving so much in this situation. And yet she's the one that's not particularly welcome by the majority. And so the story moves on to some issues of hospitality and what has been going on in the room, and we're given some of the backstory here. As host, there are some niceties that Simon should have observed when Jesus arrived in the room. But Simon had neglected to do these things by the sound of it. Was it just Jesus that he neglected this attention for, or were all the guests treated shabbily? There was no water to wash his feet, and there was no kiss of greeting. There's no oil to freshen up his head. If you arrived at the manse and I didn't take your coat and it had been raining outside and let you sit in a wet coat for the whole time, if I didn't shake your hand or hug you or greet you by name when you arrived and just said, in there, and in you walked, and you see what we're getting at here? There's some polite behavior, there's some niceties about how we entertain. And back in those times, washing people's feet, greeting them, making sure they knew that they were welcome, oil to freshen up your hair and tidy yourself up, just to make people relax and feel as at home as they can. None of that. And then the woman turns up and she washes his feet. She's moved and gripped by something, and she's in tears just by being in his presence. Something has gone on, and she's crying. She washes his feet. She lets down her hair, a hugely provocative action, particularly in the company of men, almost sexual. She lets down her hair and dries his feet. And then she breaks open the jar that she's brought, possibly quite expensive, and anoints his feet with perfume. She's gone a bit further. She's doing it well. She's modeling hospitality. She's fulfilling the role of host. She's being generous and humble and honoring the guest, Jesus, at this meal. Can you feel some of the dynamics that are going on in the room as this happens? There's an inappropriateness of it, and yet there is an honesty within it at the same time. She's got something that she wants to do for him, and the only way she knows how to do it is like this. Jesus gives us a clue in his parable about there's something to do with forgiveness going on here. There's something to do with how life has been lived in the past, sinfully, really. And he tells the story of two people owing money to a moneylender, one owing 500 denarii, the other just 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so the lender forgave the debts of both. Which will love him more? I suppose the one with the bigger debt, correctly. And then he looks at the woman and he says, "You see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears, wiped them with her hair. You didn't greet me with a kiss. This woman, from the time, but she just hasn't stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head. She's poured perfume on my feet. I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown." There's a suggestion here that something's gone on in the past, and yet she is overwhelmed with this sense of love. She's been forgiven, and she loves a lot. She's been forgiven a lot. It looks as though her actions towards Jesus are a response of faith. Maybe she met him before, maybe she's seen him in action, maybe she's heard about him. But she knows what it's like to live a life far from God and to be pushed out and be pushed away because of the reputation that lifestyle has attracted. But she also knows what grace is, to be welcomed in and accepted and received despite what has gone on before. She craves the fresh start, and he forgives her. He sees what's going on in here. He sees beyond the so-called respectability of Simon on the one hand, and beyond the degradation on the other hand in this woman's life. He understands Simon's heart and the woman's heart. He kind of sees that Simon has got probably not really that much respect for Jesus by the way he's treated Jesus. He's got Jesus there because he kind of wants to interrogate him a little bit, hear what Jesus has got to say. It's a bit of a project. But from the way he's behaved, there's a lack of respect there. The curiosity, and that's the factor that's got Jesus there, really. But Jesus understands her grateful thanks, her love for his forgiveness and a fresh start. Your sins are forgiven. Your faith has saved you. And I find this a beautiful scene. It's a beautiful scene. A broken person finds community with Jesus during a meal. But here's the thing. Meals are at the heart of church and church life. Here's a meal here. Communion, especially the heart of church life. Right back in the early years of the church, back in the first century there, when the church gathered together, they did so regularly and they ate together. And this meal would be a part of that. This communion table was at the heart of church gathered. Meals were a time to remember Jesus and be the body he called them to be. And that's why The Apostle Paul writes such firm words in 1 Corinthians about communion and eating together because the church in Corinth was doing it badly, leaving people out, favoring those with status whilst others went hungry. Just have a look at 1 Corinthians 11. Back in Bible times, when this is going on, this meal that Jesus is at, back then meals were an expression of and an opportunity for including people. It's all about inclusion, for welcome, for a sharing of the basic necessities of human existence, food and fellowship. But Simon took this meal and turned it into an elitist gathering based on his interpretation, a legalistic interpretation of righteousness. But Jesus then turns Simon's position right upside down, turns Simon's view of righteousness right upside down. And Simon grudgingly admits where Jesus is coming from and sees the argument. And so Simon and the Pharisees and his guests, they receive a lesson on grace from the Son of Man during a meal. It's a life lesson and a theology lesson rolled into one. And I guess I've got to say that in many of the faith conversations that I've had with people along the way and over the years, when I worked in a bank, I regularly had to go for dinner with people and all sorts of stuff going on and have conversations with them. And very, very often, many of these conversations would turn to the subject of either politics or religion sooner or later. It's what went on. And when it gets to the subject of religion and discussing faith and different faiths with people and where they're at, from my point of view, why I follow Jesus and that kind of thing, the comment that comes back, especially from people from marginalized communities, the thing I've discovered is that they want to know about Jesus. They really do. They're interested in Jesus. They're attracted to Jesus, but they do not want to know about church. Usually because they've got issues with the way they've been treated by church in the past, the way they perceive church, stories they've heard about church from others. They worry about how they would be received by church or judged, rejected by church. And that's the real shock in this story. Because Simon was on the inside of the religious establishment. He should have known better. But he had to have it all pointed out to him by Jesus. Do we need some stuff pointing out to us about really, really, really who is welcome through our doors? What vibes are we giving off to our community around us about church? Jesus sees the heart of this woman. He sees the heart of Simon. And he's more disgusted by what he sees in Simon's heart than by what he sees in the woman's heart. It's a big challenge, isn't it? It's a big, big challenge. We are coming to the table shortly, and we're going to do it quite gently and quite quietly this week. But as a church gathered, I'd just like us to spend a little bit of time just examining ourselves and asking the question, really, of who is welcome in our lives. Let's be still for a moment.